Welcome to another episode of the Reboot Chronicles, a no-holds-barred forum with global leaders, authors, entrepreneurs, and CEOs about how organizations stay focused on growth and innovation in unprecedented times. I'm your host, Dean DeBevoise, coming to you live from Reviv's North American headquarters in Chicago, and we would like to thank you for joining us from around the globe today. I'd like to welcome Marc DeBevoise to the Reboot Chronicles. He is the CEO of Brightcove, one of the world's top streaming technology solution providers, partnering with thousands of companies in 70 countries to stream and monetize content inside and outside of their organizations. Brightcove helps build connections between companies and their audiences. Winning 2 technology and engineering Emmy awards for innovation, Marc and his team are pushing the boundaries of what video can do for our companies and our lives. Been rebooting the company quite well. There's a good story here. And the broader video content streaming categories as well. And I really think this is a pretty exciting sector because it's projected to be about a $2 trillion market by the end of the decade if you look at all the different video streaming and content systems out there. So, Marc, it's great to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dean. Great
I'd love to be
here.
in a $2 trillion type of market, but I know yours is a very specific niche. You're all about high quality and working with the broadcasters and corporations and all that stuff. And how do you kind of different, just for the audience, how is it a little different from what they kind of know streaming to be? When people see the headline for this show, they'll be like, oh, streaming, this is about Netflix and TikTok.
Yeah, look, I think many people will determine streaming to be what they view as a consumer, right? They're going to say, I watch TikTok, that's streaming. I watch Netflix, that's streaming. And it's true, it is. And there are 5 or 6 major media companies on top of those that are, taking up a really large form of what is that consumer audience. But to us and to the overall market, it's a much larger and broader industry. We view it as you said, it's whether it's 2 trillion or hundreds of billions.
Well,
It's
that
a
was
very,
by the
very
end of the
large industry.
decade. So I was
Yeah.
looking out.
Streaming all forms of video, over the internet, whether it is for that consumer use case where you're streaming a piece of content, whether it's a news, a segment, whether for one of our customers, take a Yahoo, for example, who's one of our large customers, all their news and sports content streamed across their 1,000 properties. That comes from someone like us. Whether it's a major streaming service, take an AMC Plus, which we run the back end for AMC, or take some corporate use cases. Take a Home Depot where they get thousands of videos a month from thousands of vendors to publish on their website and on their YouTube channel. We help them aggregate that, publish it, do e-commerce on it. And then even now with the future of work being about communicating with employees in an often asynchronous manner. Everybody thinks of employee communications like, well, I did an all hands and it was on Zoom. But actually many companies, think about large companies with hundreds of thousands of employees, they have to do it in an asynchronous manner. And we have a robust systems called Communication Studio that helps build communications plans, using video for companies. So our view is it's a much broader industry than most people perceive, from like sort of publishing on the internet to streaming services as you would know them as a consumer, all the way through to e-commerce and communications use cases, across, larger corporations.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, a lot of the CEOs we've had on the program over the years, but let's just say in the last year, whenever we go off air, we always talk about the need for them they're like, we need something like this in our company. We need like our own podcast channel. I said, yeah, but with podcasting, we're broadcasting. You really need what your industry is doing, Marc, which is that 2-way communication and feedback and it to me is an untapped market. I love the Home Depot videos because I use them. I'm pretty crafty, handy person, but most people just think of it as like, oh, it's corporate training. I'm like, no. I mean, the most important thing you do is, when you're rebooting companies is your people, right? And comms and communicating with them and all your constituents. So where do you see it all going? What's now that we know video is, I think, still going to be the epicenter. It's probably more important in consumer right now, but as you say, the whole B2B side and media side.
Look, I think that both of our end markets, meaning let's call them media companies and enterprises, right, as our sort of 2 end markets, and what I would call the subsectors underneath them are going through transformation. There's no question, right? You brought it up, right? Like it's really changing, and whether that was COVID, whether it's economic issues, whether it's sort of peak of cable TV, and now the headed for a trough. All those markets are changing. So if you start in the media side, and you look at sort of big media companies and what's happened there, right? They all built, and I helped do this, right? I was the former chief digital officer, Paramount, formerly Viacom and CBS. I was one of the founders of their
Yeah,
streaming
you were
business
president of one of the
over the
groups as
past
well, I think.
decade. Yeah, and what's happened there is like there was a big overinvestment in content, right? They invested really, really big in content. They built their own teams. They built their own bespoke flowers of streaming services each. I had to, wasn't clear all the tech was really there. So I had to build a
Yeah,
big teams to
yeah,
do it. And what's come out of that is you're now at the other end where it might have been better had they not all been purely bespoke services, that they all had more similar interfaces, might be better for consumers that way. But certainly the back end should not have all been built bespoke for each company. And so you take that as a microcosm of the space. That those top, in my opinion, 100 companies around the globe probably overdid it in terms of investment in do it yourself and probably should have used more outsource options. It's a great opportunity for us at Brightcove because that's what we do. We are what I
yeah.
believe.
That's like history repeating itself
Yeah.
because you and I are both early internet day guys. When we were starting up internet companies back then, big ones, I did gaming and auto. It's
Yep.
like we had to build our own server rooms and all that infrastructure. And now it's so easy. 10 grand, you can get up and going. It's like,
Yeah, we don't have a 10 grand
no,
product
not
yet,
for
Dean,
you.
but for
I was thinking
hundreds.
AWS, like a little startup can. So
Yeah,
it's like as
totally.
history's repeated itself here. So
I use an example in my work. If you remember the ad serving days of the early 2000s, and then like in 2010 and 11, I'd say I inherited 4 ad servers when I
oh,
took over
what a
CBS
mess.
Interactive. Right, I had 2 homegrown ones, one from CBSI, one from CNET, which we had purchased a few years prior. They had DoubleClick and Freewell, all 4 in
Yeah,
the house. I said, maybe we should have one. And it wasn't just me, it was a group of people. And we said, maybe we should have one. And maybe we should take all those engineers and put them towards this new thing called streaming. And we actually we sort of repeated our own history of building our own bespoke answer, there. But we did get down to one and we saved millions of dollars. I think we're at that phase in the media streaming market. And then the other big change is that with cable TV plateauing and now coming
hmm,
down, you have streaming as the number one use case. There is a huge market for what I would call the next set. The next set is hundreds of services. Even in that Nielsen measurement, they call it the
right,
gauge. They have they probably have a bunch of percentages taken by YouTube and Netflix and Paramount and all the other major
right,
companies. And then there's an other bucket that's like 5 or 10%, which is actually the fastest growing bucket. And it's made up of 200 next scale services. We have a number of those on our platform already. Take a masterclass, for example, but there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of those around the world. And you especially see them in our global reach. We see them in lots of foreign territories, right? There are big streaming services in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Korea, you name the territory they have. It's not all going to be dominated by the US based
right.
companies, right? They are going to have their own bespoke things in each country, and they are going to need infrastructure that is supplied to them because they can't all build it themselves. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity for us and maybe a few others in that market where sort of do it yourself becomes a little bit more tech outsourced than insourced
Yeah,
over the next few
makes
years.
sense. I want to digress into cable because I was there in the early days inventing cable modems and such, but I'm more interested in what you just said because what the market is so ripe. You now have what I view as way too many competitors. I mean, everything from IBM's and Microsoft down to a lot of these little ones. I won't mention them all, but how do you fight against them, and how do you become a multi-billion-dollar player and kind of squash some of these guys?
Yeah.
Just squash them along the way.
I think just two or three points to make there on the scale side. Like first of all, the space is begging. I don't know, begging is the wrong word, but is in need of some scaled players, right? There are many, 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 maybe too small
Yep.
companies. I view us as we're one of the larger ones, and we're still probably not the scale I would like us to be in the long run. So I think we need to have some more scaled players here, so you can get the economies and efficiency that come with that, and the sort of go-to nature of knowing who the scaled player in the market is. So as a public company, as one of the few that's in the hundreds of millions of revenue, we are one of the scaled players. But let's be honest, it could be meaningfully larger to be in that realm. So I think there's probably M&A consolidation that needs to happen in the space in the
Yep.
long run. It's kind of hard in with stock markets and private markets where they are today to make those things happen, but that is something I think happens in the long run. The second is, our biggest competitors honestly still remain do it yourself and do nothing, right? On the corporate side, a lot of enterprises will just not have a video strategy yet, will not be ready. Still in
Yep.
2023, I have to think in 2025 and 2026 that has to become less true. There's going to be growth on that side, and in media companies, the do it yourself has to become less true over time. So I'd say those competitors start to fade. And then when you talk about the sort of broadness of the competitive sector, there's a lot of very, very small scale players that I think are going to, the funding will dry up at some point, right? If you can't prove to be, get out of the scale box. And so, I do think there will be a natural, flight to quality here over time, especially as, hopefully the economy improves in the next couple of years as we think it'll happen.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. The the so as you go to this next phase over the next 5 years, rapid growth. It looks like you've just brought in really expanded your management team. What's going on the people side with your company? How are you preparing for the future?
Yeah, I look very excited that we were able to attract the type of talent that we have to Brightcove. I mean, I think part of it is um, our history, right? Our capabilities here for almost 2 decades in this space, the learning we've had, the capabilities we have. People see the tech for what it is, and they also see that we're what I would call a stalled growth company. Should be growing faster. We need to get growing faster. We've been growing very slowly. If not, we shrank last year. We're probably headed up into some lower single digit growth last quarter. We should get back to growth here in the nearer term. We brought on a new CRO, a guy named Jim Norton. We announced that yesterday. We brought on a new CMO, a woman named Kathy Klingler. I've recruited a really strong team. New head of product last year, chief product officer, and Scott Levine, who came from Univision. I have a COO and David Beck, who's been in the media business for a long time and really understands this space. I think we have a fantastic team and a team that can really grow the business. And we've been able to bring on folks like Jim, who came from being a media seller early in his career to now being a software seller at Flowcode and others with Tim Armstrong and a number of other
Right.
folks that I think can really help us get this company back to growth, right? We were a growth company at our core. We need to get back to that. The good news is we're, EBITDA positive, free cash flow positive at this point. We feel very secure in the type of company we are. We're a couple hundred million, nearly an ARR. So it's a very strong software-based company. So we feel like we're poised to do that growth in the coming quarters and years. And now we have a team that can really go help us drive that. So really excited to bring those folks on board in early January, on top of the people that I've brought in now that I'm 18 months or so into the job.
18 months. That's an eternity in a CEO's job. So it seems like you're transitioning into a sales revenue market facing culture, which is there's so much out there. You've just got to, you mentioned Armstrong. I mean, that's what Google was forever. They still are, really. Just ad sales,
Yep.
boom, 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 just revenue, revenue. When you look at that, what are some of your biggest verticals? Where's the action going to be? Like from education to all your corporate users, or some, I guess,
Yep.
I guess in the
Absolutely.
corporate space.
Yeah, so we talked about the media space. We go after what I would call total cost of ownership savings for larger corporations on that front, and we have a number of wins. Take a Yahoo, for example, where we actually provide a 5 to 8x ROI in swapping out the majority of their video infrastructure across 1,000 properties. Great example there. We do that globally, right? That is we effectively approach the market in 4 territories, right? We call it EMEA, APAC. Japan is very specific for us. We've had a long-term, very large business in Japan, so we call it a separate
Huh,
territory. And then the
that's different.
Americas.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, very different. And then that next tier, which I still call the next set of streamers, which includes regional broadcasters and local broadcasters around the world, but also the master classes of the world, those direct to consumer streaming services that matter. On the enterprise side, we have a little bit of a different, approach, right? We have really 2 use cases which we thrive under. One is our marketing studio, and one is our communication studio, and those are both basically built around use cases, right? Marketing studio is built to be able to go into a marketing department and be able to help them communicate with their outside constituencies, which sometimes is B2B and sometimes is B2C. And it can be as simple as the Home Depot example I used earlier, where you are publishing effectively to their sites and apps to be able to enable to them to engage their consumers more actively, and sometimes actually do live, do transactions right there. In other cases, it's about, education, right? Take a GM or Ford, where we have both automakers using it to communicate with their dealer networks on all the new products that are coming out. What's the next, Ford F-150 going to look like? How are they going to do it? Video is the greatest way to be able to communicate that type of use case. And we see that across the board. There are both sort of B2B and B2C use cases. Communication side has also sort of what I would call multiple ways to be used. It can be purely internal. Take American Airlines, right? How many employees they have? Probably 100,000. I don't know exactly. None of them can effectively attend an all
No.
hands, right? You can't go from the tarmac to your phone as a baggage handler and be like, let me see what the CEO is going to say, right? So you really do need a portal, an asynchronous communication mechanism for your employees. We think that's very important. And then there's what we call these hybrid use cases. We have one for ourselves. We call it Play TV. It's an always on channel. It's on our site. Go check it out. It's all things about video and streaming. It's our SEs teaching people how to use product, whatever. And you'd say, well, who's this for? Well, it's partially for our employees and it's partially for our customers, right? And it may be customer engagement, it may be employee engagement around things that are happening. But having a Netflix style always on streaming service for ourselves with short form content is, I think, really beneficial for both employees and for customers. And so that's the way we go to market. We also do bespoke things. If a company comes to us who's a long-term customer and says, we're going to use video in this way, we have a wonderful services team that can come in and really customize and make things for folks that are out of the scope of what our core use cases might be on the enterprise side. And we see that a lot, to be frank, that their use cases partial this, partial that, and they want to do this specific thing. From a vertical perspective, we really thrive in, you've heard me say, retail and e-commerce, automotive and transportation, and you talk about the airlines. I would also add in technology as a vertical, right? With big customers like, NetApp and, Workday.
We love our all
like
hands
that.
meetings in tech. Yes.
Yeah. And then financial services as well, right? And some
what's
healthcare
like the
as well.
funniest, most creative thing you've seen them do? Like, does anyone do like a CEO cam where they're following their CEO around? Maybe your company, because you've got the always on channel. I love this.
No, one of
Parking lot
the coolest
monitoring.
ones from
There's something fun to watch. You just, like the
I'll
Truman
say
Show,
less fun, but
kind of stuff. It's
yeah, I don't have a great comedic example. I have a more interesting one, which is like, companies you would never suspect but really need it. I mean, we have a company named CNC Technologies, which does remote and drone streaming for mostly law enforcement
perfect.
and government agencies. And so they needed real backend to power that. We are that backend for that company, great customer. You also will find us like, a number of religious organizations, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and a number of others are big customers because they really are, using us as it's an evangelical tool, right? And that is what their mission is. And so, and you'll see it. We do it across the board and across the globe for a number of organizations that are trying to, what I would call, act like a media company, even though they're not monetizing the media the way a media company would. They're publishing media the way
it's
a media
affecting
company
people.
would.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
So all kinds of ripples.
Yeah.
What so on the sector, maybe not just you, what do you think AI is going to do for this specific sector?
Yeah, look, I think it's impacting a lot of businesses in different ways. For us, we already use machine learning and AI in a number of our
For
core
years,
technologies,
probably.
right? So
Yeah.
if you look for years, I mean, look, my first personal use of AI is probably 2011. When we built for our CBS Sports Fantasy leagues the ability to craft emails with a full summary of your game against your competitor that felt very
Yeah.
personalized. And it was a
I
company
remember that.
named
That was pretty
MLP.
smart, actually.
Yeah. But that was all AI, ML driven. It would learn what you liked, what you clicked on, what your players were doing, and it would naturally create this article for you. So we see it as very, embedded in our culture, embedded in what we do, and there's going to be more and more. Today, we use it in what I would call 3 core products right now. One is our sort of auto captioning and auto translation tools that go into our videos. That is, 100% learning machine, and we partner with a number of others on how to make that happen. The second is something we call CAE. We won an Emmy for this technology. It's context-aware encoding. If you use our system to encode and transcode your content and publish your content, we can actually reduce your storage and bandwidth costs by meaningful percentages because we both look at the output and the input and maximize, or so I should say, minimize the storage and maximize the core bandwidth
Yeah.
usage so that you reduce your cost while getting the same quality of stream. And that is a learning machine. The more you play it, the smarter and lower cost it gets. And that's something where we want to be on the right side of our customers there. And then the last one is our analytics tools. We bought a company called Wicket Labs a couple of years ago. They turned it into Brightcove Analytics and Insights, and we have a wonderful suite of tools for a range of use cases. But they predominantly for subscription and advertising media use cases. We help you optimize subscriber paths, content usage, and now advertising revenue using a learning machine, right? It basically figures out where to put your ads. It tells you where to put them, which content to use is more engaging, compares it to other use cases in our portfolio, and tells you where the optimization points are. So incredibly important. I think there's even more, especially with generative AI, where what we think it'll really help us is actually not even in our core system, but companies that can now invent a video strategy without having to go out and shoot a lot of video on their own or acquire that video, right? They may be able to make it the generative AI
Yeah.
system, right? And we're not necessarily going to be model builders or generative AI creators, but I think we will benefit from the transformation that's going to come in our industry and that capability. We want more companies to have a video strategy that they at their core, and they all should, so that we can help them, get that in the hands of their users.
I
Or their
think our
constituents.
executive producer, Chris, is salivating in the control room. That's like nirvana, what you just described. But,
Yeah,
it's like the
coming.
whole growth and innovation track here. I'm always worried about the tech oligopoly right now, the big seven. It's like, Amazon, Google, everyone's just going to end up on them or Microsoft, they just view it as, streaming. It's the same thing as our storage. Let's just consolidate. And I would love to see a consolidation of a new player that really kind of dominates the space. And I mean, how do you feel about the competitive headwinds there?
Yeah, look, we're partners with a number of those companies, so I view them as they don't necessarily want to do the things we do, right? They are suppliers to us, and they are suppliers to others. Look, if you're going to go do it yourself and build a bespoke service, maybe you can do it on just using Amazon or just using GCP or just using the tools they supply, and then
Good
hiring
luck.
the
Yeah.
100 to 1,000 engineers it's going to take to go build your service. We've already hired those people and built great services for folks, and we can do it out of the box much cheaper and much more efficiently than they can. And we're built on an Amazon backbone and a GCP data spine, and we have partnerships with many of those companies. So I look at it as I don't think they're headed in the direction of really serving customers the way we do and being a trusted streaming provider the way we are. They are infrastructure, no question. They are storage, they are CDN. Those are things we
Yep.
resell, right? We sell those are gas for the cars, but they don't necessarily make cars and sell cars to people in this regard, right? They don't make and sell services or those use cases. Now, could they pivot into those businesses? Sure, but I don't feel like they're headed in our direction. And actually, they're headed in a partnership direction in most cases with us in those regards. Now, us building a more scaled company that I agree is needed, or others in the space doing that, because I do think there is a bevy of individual options in our space, and you could really piece together what you want. But having every one of these, what should be media companies or enterprises, try to be global systems integrators feels wrong, right? Like we are effectively the systems integrator that's already done it a number of times. It should be selling them, full cakes and pies rather than them trying to build slices on their own.
Right. No, it just seems like, when you look at motivating the next generation of employees, generation X, Y, Z, alpha, whatever you want to call them, it's all about video. It's like, and it's all
Yeah.
about video on this little guy on the phone, not this beautiful screen I'm looking at you on in the studio. And it seems like that's, to me, just a massive opportunity for kind of upending a whole industry. It's like the way they're used to like communicating with people is still. It's almost like when we went away from newspapers. I mean, I know
Well, look at one of the predominant education use cases is YouTube now, right? YouTube is a tremendous source of information and data.
many
It's
companies
probably
think
the number
that's all
two
they
search.
need, really, and learning
Yeah.
institutions. We clip YouTube videos everywhere, even at
Yep. And look, I think it's a wonderful tool and a wonderful resource, but and there's no but there. That's the period. There's another sentence that goes on the end, which is, do you want to own your own destiny as a company, as a service, as a content creator? At the end of the day, if you are using YouTube only, and I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be, if you're using YouTube only, you're effectively giving over any monetization capability to Google. And that monetization capability is going to come at a roughly 50% cost to have them do it, which makes tons of sense for a lot of things. But if you have a heft and a capability and an audience and a knowledge of what you want to do, don't you want to own that yourself? And what if I told you that owning that yourself was, our average contract value is $100,000 right now, right? And so now that's not for a large streaming service necessarily, but for maybe an enterprise use case or others. So if your ACV, your average contract value is that way, defining your own destiny for hundreds of thousands or maybe low digit millions, and you're a large corporation or a large content owner, it just doesn't make sense to me to not have a capability to own your own destiny in this space. And so I think YouTube's a wonderful tool and it's a wonderful platform, and I think they're going to thrive forever, or at least for a very long time. But it shouldn't be the only way that companies look, we have the NHL is in our customer base. We talked about Sky Mexico is one of our largest customers. They're one of the biggest distributors in Mexico. And then take, corporations, Estee Lauder, 3M. We talked about Ford and GM, United Healthcare, like these companies that should own their own, digital destiny, right? To some extent, and not just be.
Well, they're realizing they should also be media companies. Their consultants tell them that they need to be technology companies, but it's actually technology/media companies, and they need good partners for that. Let's pivot to you. We've got just a little time left, but talk about yourself. You kind of were like me, grew up as a corporate guy, and then moved to Silicon Valley myself, and started doing. I was a serial CEO forever, and so you kind of jumped into the deep end, and whatever metaphor you want to use, no guardrails. What was your biggest challenge, kind of doing the switch over?
Yeah, look, I spent roughly a decade, a little less, at CBS and Viacom, and then the combination of Paramount. And by the way, I mean, getting a 10-year run anywhere these days is a
That's
phenomenal
impossible,
experience.
especially at those places. They
We,
spit people out pretty quick.
I know, we took a business, I helped take a business from a couple hundred million to a few billion, right? And when you get that opportunity, it's rare, and it was a wonderful experience. And I built wonderful relationships and a great team. I was lucky enough to take a little bit of time off between the two jobs. I got to experiment with investing, and
Smart.
being a VC and a professor back at NYU, where I had graduated, and had to come up with my own. What is my management philosophy? What worked for me? What didn't? And I really took that time, and that was a fantastic experience. And so that when I came back out and said I wanted to operate again and I wanted to run something, and I effectively ran an independent company within the umbrella of CBS. Right, I ran the entire digital division with a few thousand employees and a few billion in revenue. That stepping into a job like Brightcove wasn't, totally unfamiliar for me. I'd been around the public markets for a long time. Since early in my career, I was an investment banker, taking companies public and doing things like that. So I deeply understood what I was getting into. But the biggest transition, I would say, in this regard is, and I wanted it, was that, I love our board and how, the interaction between a CEO and board and how that works. And having to do that, you're effectively out there on your own with some great advisors and some great, you report to that board and have to deliver that message. And so that transition is pretty meaningful from being inside of a big corporation that has a lot of other things going on. Like, we are the only thing going on at the company, right? That is
It's all
all
you.
me. And so that is a big transition. I've loved it. I've had a great experience. I've gotten able to bring in a number of wonderful people to help do it with me, and inherited some great people too. I loved it. It's been a tough year in the public markets, given all the changes in interest rates and all those things. But we're very optimistic about the future and where it heads. The second thing I would say about those types of transitions is, sometimes you have to live with the uncertainty. And I think coaching people through living through that uncertainty of how these things are transforming, when you're really transforming a business like we are at Brightcove, it is both fun and challenging at the same time. And I'm really excited about bringing the people that we have on board, but also the people that have stayed with us. We have a number of employees who are 8, 10, 15 years into this
That's
company
really rare in
as
tech.
a technology
Yeah, that's
company.
good.
That's
Yeah.
rare. And it feels really good. It means like our technology is there, our capabilities are there, and we have a really
You know what
unique
else is
opportunity.
rare? I've been doing this for almost a decade. I've never heard a CEO say, "I love my board."
I do love
I've
my board. I think they do a
I've seen
phenomenal
some pretty
job. Many of
bad
some of my
boards.
board members. Yeah.
Oh, it's really refreshing to hear that. So it sounds like it went okay for you. It's usually a struggling time for most folks to really switch.
Yeah, look, I think we know 2023 from a public markets perspective and being a small public company is definitely a challenge. And there's no we would not run from that challenge. But I think we're all saying that we understand our market and what we're going after. And so delivering performance for our investors over the long run, the stock market will measure us in the right ways. I always think about stock price as a long-term measuring tool, not a short-term reactionary measuring tool. So you have to be very cautious about overreacting to short term. And short term is a quarter or two, and long term is
Yeah,
years.
and people
And
have
so you have to
different
think
views
about
of
it.
that. They
Yes.
love the short term.
Um,
Thanks, Mark. I really,
exactly.
really appreciate it. It's good having you on. You've been listening to Marc DeBevoise, who is the CEO of Brightcove. This is Dean DeBevoise with the Reboot Chronicles. I want to thank you for joining us today. We'll see you soon.